What themes come to mind when you think of Lord of the Rings? Examples I frequently hear include environmentalism versus industrialization, nostalgia for a more beautiful and wonderful past, the need for diversity and inclusivity, and the power of brotherly love and companionship. All of these are very much present in the story to one degree or another, but in my opinion, the message at the story's heart is one that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. But before I get into it, if you're new to the channel, I'm just thinking out loud here, so if you like my brain vomit, you know where the like and subscribe buttons are. And without further ado, let's dive into the heart of one of the greatest works of fiction ever put to page. The Lord of the Rings is quite arguably the most influential book written in the last century. We all know the story. It practically defined the fantasy genre for the modern day, bringing ancient mythologies to life for modern audiences, and making people take what Tolkien called fairy stories seriously again, in an age when such things were seen as simple children's material. So of course, the work has spawned countless copycats for decades since. Such staples of the genre as the archetype of the fantasy adventurer, and the very concept of an epic cross-country quest to save the world from a dark lord, or at least defeat some kind of monster, set in a high medieval world populated by wise and regal immortal elves, stout and hardy treasure-hoarding dwarves, and savage and bloodthirsty orcs bred for war, are all foundational to our idea of fantasy, thanks to the Lord of the Rings. RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons are built upon these staples. Video game franchises like World of Warcraft, Skyrim, and The Witcher, not to mention classic series of novels like the Shannara Chronicles or the Inheritance Cycle, have reused all these concepts over and over again. Heck, the first novel in the epic Wheel of Time saga starts out as a beat-for-beat recreation of the plot of the Fellowship of the Ring, and yet, with so many shameless copycats saturating the genre, I feel like all of them somehow miss the central point of The Lord of the Rings. To the point that if you didn't know it came first, then if you put it next to all its copycats, you might think it was written as a subtle yet brilliant subversion of the fantasy tropes. Because I think, in a way, it was. Possibly the core message of Tolkien's story is that it is not by great power that evil is defeated. This seems like a simple enough idea, but as often as writers knock off Tolkien's plot and world building, this theme is one that few writers taking inspiration from the master really seem to grasp. Most traditional fantasy classics have a prophesied chosen one born with great power of some kind, who is the only one who can defeat the Dark Lord, and or some powerful weapon needed to defeat him. Think about it, if Lord of the Rings was any other generic epic fantasy, Aragorn would have to take the ring and use it to defeat Sauron, and because he's the chosen one, he would be the only one who could do so because his will is just that pure and strong. But of course, the chosen one, the prophesied king, is not the one to defeat the Dark Lord. He plays a pivotal role, yes, but it is perhaps the least powerful, the least special character in the story, who is chosen to bear the task of defeating the Dark Lord, because he is so simple, so ordinary, so humble. And guess what? Even he doesn't succeed. In a way, the evil ends up destroying itself as the creature lost to its corruption, foils its escape, and in his carelessness takes it with him to his doom. So what's up with that? Why is this how Tolkien chose to tell his story? Well, let's see what lessons we can take from his work. And before any of you comment telling me his work wasn't an allegory and shouldn't be treated as such, I'm not drawing specific parallels between characters, objects, or events in the book and in the real world, and I certainly wouldn't claim any parallels to be deliberate. I believe that is all Tolkien was so opposed to. I am merely observing moral themes and timeless truths clearly woven into the fabric of the story. So anyway, let's take a look, shall we? The ring promises power to its wielder. It enhances one's natural abilities, grants dominion over the wills of others, and through it, one's greatest ambitions may be realized. However, it is infused with the will and nature of Sauron, designed to aid his will, and it will influence whoever bears it accordingly. It can be bent to the will of another, yes, but even then its influence is subtle and sinister, and its power is inherently evil, possibly in particular due to its power to dominate the wills of others. It plays on even the most noble ambitions and desires of its wearer, feeding their fear, their pride, their greed, reducing every thought, every hope, every dream, every craving and desire, selfish or selfless, into a need for its power. We could find plenty of real-world parallels here, but the point I want to make now is that you don't have to be evil at heart to be influenced, enslaved, and corrupted by evil. And being stronger, being more noble or more powerful, are not going to make you immune, or even more resistant. No matter how strong your will or how good your intentions, you are not above temptation. You are not above corruption. And if you think you are, if you think you can dabble in it without it harming you, if you think you can use evil means to accomplish good, or that you are justified in doing evil because your heart is good, then you have already given evil place in your heart. This was Boromir's weakness. He wanted to do good. He wanted to use the power of the ring to lead his people against Sauron, but however selfless his intentions, his consideration of the use of evil gave it power over him. This is what Aragorn, Gandalf, and Galadriel understood when they rejected the ring. It's not that using the ring wouldn't work. It could, but through them, as Gandalf said, it would wield a power too great and terrible to imagine. When Sauron thought Aragorn had the ring, he was terrified because he feared Aragorn would use it to defeat him. They could have used the ring's power to overthrow their enemy, but they knew that evil is evil, whoever's hands it's in, and if they were to use it, then they would be no better than their enemy. According to Galadriel, with it she would become a great and powerful queen, as beautiful as she was terrible, whom all would love and despair. Perhaps not as repulsive a Dark Lord as Sauron, perhaps even adored by her subjects, but just as corrupted at heart and just as dominating over the wills of men. This is what Boromir failed to understand because he was so concerned with protecting his people, which is not an evil or selfish desire. So what made Frodo a more worthy candidate than his fellows? Was he just stronger of will or purer of heart? No, in fact, part of it was his lack of power, and thus his lack of ability to do any great evil with the ring if it corrupted him. But if that was all, he could have still ended up like Gollum, a petty and pathetic creature totally consumed by his addiction to this object, and he probably would have in time. In fact, definitely would have in time had he escaped Mordor with the ring. But the reason he lasted so long was his humility. Let's define pride and humility real quick. Pride is putting faith in our own strength and our own will, while humility is putting faith in the will of God. If you're atheist, I hope you don't mind me making this bit about God, but as Eru Ilúvatar, he is an active character in the Legendarium, and Tolkien did say The Lord of the Rings was at its core a Catholic work, and I'm not Catholic, so I hope you too can take something away from this, whether or not you share the professor's beliefs. The prideful are those who think they can bend the ring to their will, and not be corrupted. We tend to associate pride with great power, but Gollum suffered from a different kind of pride, a simple conceited selfishness. Frodo's humility was seen in his willingness to do whatever was asked of him, whatever was needed of him. He didn't think he was capable of great things, and he certainly didn't think he knew better than anyone else, but he was willing to do whatever the great and wise people around him said needed to be done. He was willing to submit to the will of God, or fate if you prefer, to be the simple instrument of a higher power than himself, and play whatever small part he could in saving the world, his home, and the lives of those he loved. That selfless willingness to submit to divine will is the most noble virtue of all, greater than the strength of the great warriors of old, but even that wasn't enough to overcome the ultimate force of evil. However, that doesn't mean that he failed. He did all he could and allowed the ring to be brought where it needed to be for God to finish the rest with a little divine intervention. Now I think Aragorn had the humility to do what Frodo did if it was required of him, as he demonstrated great humility in choosing to protect Frodo and follow the will of the council, and was ultimately willing to trust Frodo to the will of God and let him go off on his own. But he had his own role to play. He knew his destiny as the rightful king of Gondor, and that he would be needed to lead the forces of men while Frodo performed his task, and so, because of his humility, he allowed the fate of the ring to leave his power and did his part without question. That likely took as much humility as taking the ring to Mordor. As much as I loathe the existence of Amazon's cheap, soulless imitation of a show stealing the name of Tolkien's masterpiece for viewership, it does have a single good line, that it is not great power that defeats darkness, but light. And where does light come from? God. Light will always triumph over darkness. It already has, and God will always prove to be in control. Our purpose isn't to defeat darkness by our own power, as it will always be a part of this world. And we certainly can't hope to destroy darkness with darkness, but we can allow ourselves to be instruments of light, to humbly do our small part in God's will by selflessly doing whatever good we can with whatever power has been granted us. I am not saying that other fantasy and sci-fi epics following in Tolkien's footsteps fail to have any depth or understand any of Tolkien's themes. I merely want to point out what I find most profound and inspiring in this great work, something that I think gets too often taken for granted and overlooked by readers and writers alike. This, I believe, is the message at the heart of The Lord of the Rings, a far more deep and nuanced exploration of the nature of power than any modern attempt to be edgy and subversive with the tropes Tolkien solidified in the genre. Not to say that subversive storytelling with moral ambiguity is without merit, but that's a topic for another video, and one I hope to get to soon. I really enjoyed getting back into The Lord of the Rings for this video. It's probably my favorite book and series of films of all time, and I was shocked to realize I've never actually talked about it on the channel before now, other than to roast those who've butchered it. Well, that's about to change, because I recently rewatched the films and committed to finally make a series of videos about the greatest story of the modern Western world. So expect more like this from me soon. If you like what you saw, I hope you'll join me again next time, and in the meantime, share your thoughts down below. What themes do you find most powerful in The Lord of the Rings? What do you think makes it so timeless? How has it impacted you? I sincerely look forward to continuing the conversation with all of you in the comments. So please, never stay silent.